with Dr. Chuck F. Betters, produced by Mark Inc. Ministries. Each In His Grit message is designed to help turn our hearts toward Jesus and equip us to walk by faith. Let's join Dr. Betters in the sanctuary as he preaches the series, Midwives of the Messiah.
There we are told in the Midrash that her father was none other than the king of Moab, Eglon. You need to write his name down, Eglon. A funny name, but a man with a tragic story. In Judge Ehud's time, now remember this is set in the context of the book of Judges, so this is a story that Ruth, if she were the daughter of Eglon, Ruth would have lived through this story. This would have formed some of her background before she married the son of Elimelech. In Ehud's time, the foreign kings, the king of Moab, specifically Eglon, became an oppressing nation against Israel. They oppressed them with heavy tax burdens, and Israel became subservient to the people of Moab. He set up his throne, Eglon did, in none other than Jericho. Jericho, you remember that place, don't you? You remember after the children of Israel had walked through the tremendous miracle of the Exodus, they came to the little town of Jericho, about the size of a football field. And how they marched around the walls of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down, and the troops went in, and there was a tremendous victory that God had given them, a miraculous victory that we see described in the Bible. Well, now, somehow or another, that town is rebuilt. And sitting on the throne in that same place where that same victory occurred is none other than the king of Moab. Quite a tragic scene. The Bible tells us that the Lord gave Eglon and the Moab people a great deal of weight, a great deal of power, a great deal of control as a punishment for the faithlessness of Israel. Remember again, they're in this cycle of the judges. But now in Ehud's day, Jericho is now in enemy's hands. The pagan king of Moab establishes his throne in the very place where God had worked this tremendous miracle. Now Ehud was leading a delegation to pay their taxes. Ehud had to come and bring tribute as a judge of Israel. A holy man, a great leader, is now standing before King Eglon. Imagine this scene. Here is Ehud coming to pay the tribute to the oppressing king who is now sitting on the throne of Jericho, the very place God had already conquered. And he's doing so as a direct result of the rebellion of the people as God handed them over to their enemies. But God never leaves us without a people. The Bible tells us that Ehud was a southpaw. He was left-handed. And there's a reason why. Beginning with verse 21, it says, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. He had come to announce to Eglon, I have gifts for you. I have something I want to give you. Now the king assumed he was coming to pay his taxes. And he stands there before this heathen king, this oppressing king, and he says to him, I have a present for you. I have a gift for you. The Bible also tells us that Eglon was a very heavy man. He was extremely overweight. It describes him as one who sat on his throne, kind of like you would see a Humpty Dumpty doing. Here is the man, fat as can be, sitting on his throne, holding out his hands and saying to Ehud, give it to me. And so with his left hand, he reaches into his right thigh and he pulls out this dagger. And he plunges this dagger into the gut of Eglon. In fact, the Bible gets even more graphic when it tells us even the handle sank in after the blade, which came out his back. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed it over. King James tells us, and the dirt came rushing out. You get the picture. And if the Midrash is correct, this same Eglon was Ruth's daddy. What a tragedy that must have been. If he was the one who named her Rose, this was a rose certainly living among thorns. This same Ruth would now face another tragedy. Elimelech moved his family to find a better life, and instead, when he died, he left his family penniless and socially alienated. Your life can change on a dime. You believe that? In a second, your life can change dramatically. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he was simply riding his bike one day, just riding his bike. And to make a long story short, he is now paralyzed from the neck down. In a second, a brilliant, sharp, vascular surgeon. And I'll never forget going to visit him after he had this accident and seeing this man whose life was changed just like that. That can happen to any of us. Some event, some circumstance, something in your life can happen that will change you in a heartbeat. This is what happened to Naomi and her daughters. But now Ruth is about to face other tragedies. She would have to face incredible grief from a dysfunctional and greedy dad to a home life in which she could take great joy and comfort, and right back to the heartache and suffering of a penniless widow. How does this happen? Is that what this story is about? Well, if you look at verse 6 of chapter 1, the book of Ruth, it says, when she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, in other words, the famine is starting to come to an end, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. That was the one place Naomi knew well. I need to go home. I need to go home. Verse 7, with her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. You know, this was Jewish custom. The daughters-in-law would travel with their mother-in-law to her home. They would accompany her. But then once they got there, they would have the option of staying or leaving. But here they are, these three women, setting out for Bethlehem, Naomi writhing in terrible emotional pain. I mean, after all, she lost her husband. She lost her son. She lost her other son. She's facing poverty. She will more than likely return to Bethlehem, and she will have to beg for a living. She knew that that was the life awaiting her. She would have to be on the streets begging for a living. I don't know how old she was, 50, 60 years old. You think losing a job is tough, and it is. I do not minimize the pain that some of you are experiencing because of the loss of a job. But this story is about more than the loss of a job. It's the loss of a whole life. Your life has now been sucked out of you. Your spirit, your soul is dying. And there's nothing or nobody around you that can help you put the pieces of your life back together again. So Naomi says to her two daughters-in-law, verse 8, go back. Remember now, they're Moabites. Moab was their home. Moab was the language they spoke. Moab's religion was the religion they embraced. The culture, the family, the environment, the culture. That was Moab. Naomi says, you need to go back. Go back home, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you, as you have shown to your dead, that's her sons, and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. You're young women. You'll get married again. I am an old woman. I am not going to get married again. You will find another family. You can put the pieces of your life back together. All that awaits you here in Bethlehem with me is begging on the streets. So go home. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. No, Naomi said, go home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because this is a key now. This is Naomi's heart. This is the spirit of Naomi, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. At this, they wept again. Must have been a lot of weeping going on there, because now these girls were at a crossroads of making a critical decision as to what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. Follow Naomi to poverty, or go back home to Moab, and more than likely put the pieces of your life back together again. It tells us in verse 14, then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. Now, one can hardly blame Naomi. She truly believed that God was against her. She truly believed that God had raised his hand against her. And later, she's going to say to some of her women friends when she enters back into Bethlehem, she's going to, as they greet her, hello, Naomi. No, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter. Call me bitter. Now, I want to make one thing very clear. I don't think this was a bitterness against God. I think this was a bitterness of soul. This was a woman for whom life had lost all of its meaning. There was no joy. This is not a sinful rebel who's raising her hand and shaking her fist in God's face. No, she still acknowledges that that is a sovereign God, but that because of him, and frankly, friends, that's true of all of us. Nothing happens to you by chance or fate or mistake that isn't first filtered through the sovereign hand of God. Even the evil acts of men are controlled by the sovereignty of God. He allows evil. He even filters it so that no temptation that has taken you is uncommon to you. It's common to man. But God is faithful in that he will not permit you to suffer beyond what you are able to bear, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape that you may endure it. You will have to walk through the pain. He doesn't take it away. He just protects you as you walk through it. This is what I believe Naomi's spirit is. Her life was over, at least as far as she could see. Everything she loved was gone. And what a wonderful act of love for her to release these two girls. She could have clung to those two girls. She could have said, "What am I going to do without you?" In fact, instead, she said, "What are you going to do with your life with me? There's nothing but heartache awaiting you." So Orpah goes back, but Naomi says no. Look at verse 15. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods." That's a critical statement there. Her gods. Moab did not worship the God of Israel. You're going back home. Your sister-in-law is going back home to her people and to her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, by the way, this is one of the most critical, pivotal passages in all of the Bible. Mark this baby down. It's a turning point. I believe it's as great a turning point as the Exodus is, as the giving of the law. These major turning points where we turn a chapter and we say, okay, what's next? But without the previous chapter, you can't open the new one. This is a critical chapter, and these are critical words coming out of a woman who is a recent widow, who is at a crossroads in her life, hearing her mother-in-law, the spiritual mentor in her life, saying, God's hand is against me. Why would you want to be anywhere near me? She says, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Here are the words. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. I believe that's Ruth's conversion, or at least it's an expression of her conversion. She is lining herself up with the God of Israel. She is taking her stand, turning her back on all that she knew to be common, and she was putting all of her marbles into this bag. Your God and your people are going to become my people. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. Would you have said that? Let's see. We're at the crossroads. I'm standing here at the crossroads. I can go this way and more than likely enjoy my upper middle class way of life. Probably meet another husband. Oh yeah, I'll miss my family, but there's my family too. I can still go to church the same way I've always gone to church, still worship the same way I've always worshiped. I don't have to learn a new language. I don't have to learn a new culture. I don't have to learn how to make friends. I don't have to get involved with a whole new group of people. I can just go back there to the familiar. Or I can turn this way and I can take a leap of faith that this poor, ready to beg, bitter, heartbroken, grieving, mother-in-law of mine and her religion and her culture, none of which I know anything about except what I've seen in her, I can either go there or I can go there. You realize how incredible her decision was? Your God will be my God. Where you're going, I will go. And may it be death only that separates the two of us. This meant that Ruth would not only turn her back on her own people in Moab, but she would also reject their religion and take her stand with Naomi and Naomi's religion. Some of the most profound words ever spoken in faith. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. There is nothing awaiting Ruth and Naomi but poverty. There was no name it and claim it preacher who stood there in front of them and said, you know, girls, all you have to do is have enough faith and just get in there to town. You know, the famine's starting to lift. Get in there, name it and claim it, it's yours. If you have enough faith, you'll be rich. You'll be well. None of that. You don't even hear the voice of God promising them anything. You don't hear God saying to Naomi, it's going to be all right. Trust me. It's going to be all right. What you do hear is Naomi saying, God, why are you against me? Why have you lost? Why have I lost any sense of your presence? Why have you abandoned me this way? You ever been there? And so, in sharp contrast to the violence and the apostasy of the judges, we have now building a true Hallmark movie, shaping up. Bring your tissue, one that affects you and one that affects me, even as we sit here. The question is, what's this story about? What is the message? What is God trying to say to us? What can you take home with this? Where do you see yourself? Naomi? Do you see yourself in her bitterness and brokenness, wondering why God has deserted her? Do you see yourself in Orpah, who also stood at the crossroads, who also made a choice? We don't know a whole lot of what happened to her afterwards. She kind of disappears off the pages of the scriptures. Or are you Ruth? Are you facing a faith-sized decision that will prove whether or not you believe that your God is a sovereign God and in your life he can be trusted? You're facing that every day of your life. You're at that crossroads every day, some to a greater degree, some to a smaller degree, some in major decisions, some in tiny decisions, even as to where you park your car. God is sovereign, and you can trust him. That's the message of all of Scripture. Because here as we stand, out of these circumstances, out of this environment, the Messiah is coming. Ruth did not know that. Naomi did not know that. They did not have the book of Ruth in front of them to read. They don't know how it ended. They had to walk the journey so that you and I can read their story and trust that that God who oversaw those three women and protected those three women is the same God that knows whether or not you're going to get fired tomorrow. The same God that knows whether or not you're going to have a bad report from a doctor. The same God who knows your broken heart with your wayward kids. The same God who knows the depression you live in every single day. The same God who knows when you get up in the morning and your mind says go and your body says no. That same God. That same God who knows that when you sign the checks at the end of the month, there's not enough there. Not even for the most basic things. The same God who calls you to tithe in spite of that and says, trust me, trust me. The same God who knows you're going to get into massive trouble this week or this month or this year. You're going to make decisions that are so terrible and so rebellious that God would have every right to pick you up and throw you out of his life. But he's not going to do that. None of us have ever sunk so low that our God hasn't sunk lower to pick us up.
Thank you for listening. For the complete sermon, please visit markinc.org and click In His Grip. Join Dr. Chuck F. Betters in the sanctuary from Monday to Thursday on the In His Grip podcast.